Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we are tearing right into the actual architectural blueprint for building a fully operational journal assembly from the ground up. Now look, I know you guys already understand the basics, grand juries, due process, all of that, so we're skipping the 101 stuff and diving straight into the core mechanics. We're going to examine the exact structural framework and the specific roles you absolutely need to turn a theoretical assembly into a sustainable, functional reality.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to systematically walk through 6 key areas. 1. Foundation and core components. 2. Officers and administration. 3. Jury operations and committees. 4. Records and documentation. 5. Peacekeeping and procedures. And finally, number 6. Challenges and sustainability.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Foundation and Core Components.
You know, if you're building any kind of lasting structure, you've got to have a rock-solid foundation, right? Well, in this case, that foundation is the formal, documented assembly process. And to establish a legitimate jural assembly in court, the source material lays out this really precise, sequential 12-step process. It's a strict progression. You literally go from the very first call to session, all the way through populating your militias, running elections, and ultimately arriving at complete self-governance, where that initial coordinator role just completely sunsets.
Let's zoom in on those critical first 4 steps to see how this actually builds. It all kicks off with Step 1, a recognized summoning authority, like a committee of quorum, a president, or a head of state, initiating the session. Then, in Step 2, volunteers have to step up and tackle the required paperwork to properly reconvey their status to the land and soil jurisdiction. Once that paperwork is locked in, Step 3 happens. Coordinators are formally vetted to organize the workflow. And boom! That leads us right into Step 4, where the assemblies are officially populated and finally open for business.
Moving right along to Section 2, Officers and Administration. So, now your assembly is populated. What's next? Well, you need specific administrative officers to keep the wheels turning. And the first really crucial role here is the meeting moderator. Think of the moderator as the anchor of order for the whole assembly. They act strictly as a neutral party to open, close, and guide the proceedings. They're definitely not there to be the star of the show, you know? They are the structural support that literally keeps the meeting from collapsing into total chaos.
The major takeaway here is that a great moderator actually speaks very little. Their entire focus is on maintaining decorum, strictly sticking to the agenda, and making sure speaking time is fair and impartial. And hey, if things get a little heated, which, let's face it, happens, they have to be the one to calmly de-escalate the situation. They avoid injecting their personal opinions and instead set really strict boundaries for conduct.
Okay. Alongside the moderator, another massive administrative pillar is the public notary. If the moderator's job is keeping the meetings on track, the notary's job is keeping the membership on track. They are the ones helping people wade through the mountain of multi-step paperwork that's required for legitimate participation.
And because recording status changes and establishing standing is incredibly complex, this role demands someone who is highly organized and incredibly dependable. They kind of need to be a patient people person and a teacher all rolled into one. The notary has to have an encyclopedic knowledge of due process, meticulously track all these multi-step processes, and just be ready to answer a ton of procedural questions for new members coming into the fold.
That brings us to Section 3, Jury Operations and Committees.
All right, so the administrative framework is in place. Now the Assembly has to form standing committees to handle the really specialized tasks, especially when it comes to the courts and the jury system. For example, you've got the Court Venue Committee. They're out there seeking actual physical accommodations for the courts. Then there's the Law Education Committee, evaluating educational opportunities on public law for the members, and of course the Jury Pool Committee, which handles the massive job of administering the selection and care of the jurors.
And speaking of jurors, the jury pool itself is essentially the beating heart of the jural assembly. It functions as the ultimate decision-making body for both in-state and international issues, and it operates continuously, year-round, to actually enforce public law.
Now, here's a fundamental principle of this blueprint. Literally, everyone in the jural assembly serves as a juror. There is a slight jurisdictional split to be aware of, though. Both state nationals and state citizens decide the local, in-state cases, but only state citizens hear the international subject matter. And interestingly enough, serving doesn't require any special commercial licensing or bonding. The only real vetting required at this stage is just a standard conflict of interest check on a case-by-case basis.
Let's pivot to Section 4, Records and Documentation.
To prove all of this is actually legitimate, that your jury pool is valid and the assembly is lawful, the whole system leans heavily on rigorous ironclad record-keeping. And the magic number here? It's 3. 3 represents the original triplicate standard for all vital documentation created by the state recorder. Without this 3-copy system, the legitimacy of the entire assembly can basically be thrown out the window. So to protect against, loss, tampering, or just general administrative failures, things like political status records and assembly minutes have to be locked down in these 3 distinct spots. Copy number 1, that's kept right by the Jural assembly member. Copy number 2 gets sent over to the Soil Jurisdiction County Organization. And that final copy, copy number 3, is safely retained by the state Jural assembly recorder. It's a dispersed record-keeping system that absolutely proves due diligence.
Which leads us to Section 5, Peacekeeping and Procedures.
Naturally, any assembly is going to need physical security and operational enforcement, right? That's where dedicated peacekeeping roles come in. Meet the marshal at arms. They work directly alongside the moderator. But while the moderator is guiding the conversation, the marshal is out there physically securing the meeting location and making sure the participation guidelines are actually enforced.
And their job is way more than just acting like a bouncer. They ensure safety and decorum at all events. They care for the flag. They even work hand-in-hand with the Elections Committee to physically secure the ballots during voting. Plus, they are specifically tasked with training deputies in assembly security protocols to help expand the peacekeeping force. Now, zooming out to support the broader safety needs of the state, you have the Assembly Militia. This group steps up for the larger-scale physical duties. We're talking interstate rescue, emergency relief, and local county assistance.
What's really cool to understand about the militia in this specific framework is just how inclusive it is. Sure, anyone fit between the ages of 21 and 45 is eligible for frontline stuff, but eligibility essentially expands to absolutely anyone physically able to contribute. As the source material points out, even if you're 85 years old and your contribution is doing administrative paperwork or prepping food for the crew, you can join. There are literally no special exclusionary hurdles keeping you out.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Challenges and Sustainability.
Okay, so building this structure is one thing, but keeping it running smoothly for the long haul, that's a whole different ballgame. To maintain sustainability, the assembly has to fiercely guard against internal corruption and authority power trips. The texts are super explicit about this. The biggest organizational threat is positional authority. The source literally warns against individuals acting like, quote, pigs in Animal Farm, demanding special privileges, ruling as emperors, and arbitrarily disqualifying members based on their title. In a healthy assembly, you only have functional authority. People act strictly as functionaries. They are constrained by the duties of their office to just do a specific job and protect individual rights. No crowns, just functions.
Ultimately, this entire blueprint only holds together when all these elements, the moderators, the notaries, the secure triplicate records, and that humble functional authority are maintained, which brings us to this essential truth straight from the source. A functional Jural assembly requires organization, trained participants, accurate records, and a commitment to due process and public justice. So here's the question to leave you with. Looking at this structural blueprint, what do you think would be the very first hurdle your own community would face in putting these exact pieces together? Something to really think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope this breakdown gave you a clear, actionable understanding of the material.